The blade pressed against Ethan's ribs so hard he thought it might pierce through his skin. The sun burned above the Angola prison fields, and sweat ran into his eyes, stinging them. Around him, rows of inmates chopped weeds with dull hoes, their movements steady and robotic. Guards shouted from the line, and in the distance a rifleman in the tower shifted his aim. Dogs barked at the fence like they already smelled blood. Harlan, the inmate with a torn shirt and a cruel grin, leaned closer. "Move off my row," he hissed, the shank hidden from the guards. Ethan's chest tightened. If he moved, he would look weak. If he didn't, Harlan might cut him down right there in the field. Earlier that morning, Ethan had arrived at Angola for the first time. The prison bus rolled past towering fences topped with razor wire, and the sight alone sent a cold wave through his stomach. Angola was massive, fields stretched as far as the eye could see, and the watchtowers stood like steel giants on every corner. Some inmates whispered that the land used to be a plantation, and the fields hadn't changed much since then. It felt less like a prison and more like a world that swallowed people whole. Inside intake, the air smelled like bleach and metal. Guards handed out bedrolls and ID bands, barking orders like drill sergeants. Ethan tried to keep his head down, but every step reminded him that he didn't belong here. When they led him into the dormitory, rows of steel bunks lined the room. The lights flickered yellow, and the air was thick with sweat and whispers. Men stared at him as if measuring how long he might last. An older inmate with gray eyes finally motioned him over. "Ray Donovan," the man said in a calm voice. Ethan clutched his bedroll tighter. "Stick with me, and listen if you want to live." The chow hall was his next lesson. Ethan carried his tray to a table, beans, cornbread, and something greasy that didn't smell like food. Around him, men argued over seats, but the tension died instantly when a guard looked their way. Ray leaned close and whispered, "Don't owe anyone. Don't stare. And whatever you do, don't slow the line." Ethan nodded, even though he didn't yet understand what the line meant. It became clear when they marched to the fields. The sun was brutal, the heat radiating off the dry ground until it felt like he was standing in an oven. Inmates walked in rows, hose slung over their shoulders, guards pacing beside them, tower rifles watching from above. The rhythm of the line was hypnotic. Lift, drop, scrape, step. Ethan tried to match it, but sweat blurred his vision, and his muscles burned. Ray whispered, "Breathe through it. If you stop, you're marked." That was when Harlan appeared. Big, muscular, and wearing a torn shirt, he stepped too close to Ethan's space. His smile was thin and mean. "You're in my row," he said. Ethan looked at the flags marking the rows. He was right where the guards had told him to stand. "I'm not over the line," Ethan whispered back. Harlan chuckled, nudging him with an elbow. "I don't care." Ethan tried to keep moving, his hoe hitting the ground in shaky rhythm. But then came the sharp poke at his ribs, the shank, small but deadly. Harlan's voice was almost playful. "Now you move, rookie, or you bleed." The tower rifle above shifted, the guard's sunglasses flashed, and the dogs barked louder at the fence. Ethan's breath caught, sweat dripping off his chin. His hands tightened on the hoe, knuckles white. He wanted to yell, but his voice was gone. Harlan's grin widened. The blade pressed deeper. "Time's up," he whispered. Ethan's breath locked in his chest as the blade dug a fraction deeper. For a heartbeat, he thought Harlan would stab him right there in the field. But just as quick, Harlan slid the shank back into his palm, his cruel grin lingering. "Next time, rookie," he muttered, stepping away like nothing had happened. The line of inmates kept moving. Guards shouted at them to stay in rhythm. The tower rifle shifted again, but no one stopped. To the prison, it was just another hot day in Angola. Ethan's hands trembled as he swung the hoe, trying to keep pace. Every scrape of metal on dirt sounded like thunder in his ears. His shirt clung to his skin, soaked with sweat. All around him, men bent and chopped, bent and chopped. It was endless, a rhythm that promised no mercy. Ray glanced over from the next row, his face unreadable. "Keep moving," he said softly, "or you'll get worse than a blade." That night in the dormitory, Ethan lay on his thin mattress, staring at the ceiling shadows. The air was hot and heavy. Inmates whispered, laughed, and clanged metal against bunks. Sleep refused to come. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt the cold tip of that shank pressing into his ribs again. Ray sat on his bunk, calm as always, watching the room. "You just had your first warning," Ray said quietly. "Here, they don't give many." Ethan wanted to ask what he should do, but the words died in his throat. Morning came too quickly. Roll call echoed through the dorm, guards yelling names. Breakfast was a scoop of cold grits and a hard biscuit. Ethan pushed it around the tray but barely ate. His stomach was tied in knots. Across the room, Harlan sat with his crew, staring at him with the same thin smile. Ethan looked away, but the warning was clear. Harlan hadn't forgotten. The hours in the fields dragged on. Ethan's muscles ached, his hands blistered, but fear kept him moving. Every time he felt someone step too close, his heart lurched. The guards watched from the line, rifles ready in the towers, but Ethan realized they weren't there to protect him. They were there to keep the work going. That evening, back in the dorm, the sound of clanging gates shook the room. Guards dragged in 2 inmates, both beaten and bloodied. One's face was swollen, the other's shirt stained dark. They dumped the men onto the floor like sacks of grain. The dorm went silent. Every inmate froze, eyes fixed on the broken bodies. The guards barked, "This is what happens when you cross the line," then turned and left as if nothing had happened. Ethan's chest tightened as he stared. The men groaned softly, left lying on the concrete. No one moved to help them. Around him, the silence was heavy, as if the whole dorm had been reminded of an unspoken rule. Violence was always waiting. Ray leaned close, his voice a whisper. "Now you see it. Angola doesn't just punish with bars. It punishes with fear." Ethan swallowed hard, the truth sinking deeper than the blade had. He wasn't just serving time here. He was fighting to survive every second. Then his eyes lifted, and across the dorm, Harlan was watching him again. The same grin stretched across his face. Slow, patient, promising. Ethan's stomach dropped. The fight wasn't over. It hadn't even started.